Welcome, Raise Your Inner Game. Today, I'm David Levin. This is our Friday episode, so we're talking about the inner game of life. Tuesdays are for the mental game of sports and competition. Fridays are for the rest of our lives. So how are you feeling this week? I am dragging again. This time because I have a cold, maybe you can tell. It's not a super bad one. No fever, not feeling terrible, but I'm just tired. I got a cough that's been messing with my sleep. I actually moved to the couch the other night because I didn't want to wake Margaret up with my coughing. That's a bummer. I really hate it when something messes with my sleep. And of course, it's also been crazy cold outside. It was so cold this week that school closed for 2 days. It was too dangerous for kids to stand outside and wait for the bus. Can you imagine? Of course, if you live up north, you can, but it is a freaky and a little frightening thing. I always think, God, what would happen if our furnace quit, And I'm so thankful, grateful that it doesn't. Thank you, furnace. Anyway, sort of a wasted week. I'm not getting much done. Not feeling like doing much. Just sort of blah all around. Happens sometimes. I hope your week is feeling better than that. So lots to talk about this week. Trump's pardons of the January 6th rioters. Elon Musk's Nazi salute. That was fun. Some new crazies of the week. The most important observation for raising your inner game, some thoughts on relationships and masculinity, our challenge of the week, Severance is finally back, and my beautiful new electric scooter. All right, we'll start with ups and downs. So what gave me a lift this week and what things are pulling me down? My first up is my son's lovely relationship with his girlfriend. They've been together for about 8 months now, and it's just so great to see them together. They're so relaxed and comfortable and gentle and real with each other. It feels like they've been together forever, and it's hard to imagine them not being together. And it just makes me so happy for him. He is so far beyond where I was at that age, in many ways, but especially in his maturity with relationships of all kinds, really. His Waldorf education, I think, gets a lot of the credit. They put a lot of emphasis on group dynamics, on including everyone, on engaging with grown-ups, dealing with difficulties, and you can really feel that in him. I didn't have any of that, of course. Most of us don't. I also didn't have any male role models as I grew up, so I don't know how much that played a role, but still, I was just really self-focused and clueless about relationships at that age, and probably up until Margaret and I had been together for quite a few years, which means it was probably like 10 or 15 years later than where he is now. Fun little detail. I might have mentioned this before, but when Margaret and I started dating, and I was 28 at the time, she was literally the first person I'd gone out with who hadn't first seen me play on stage in a band. So think about that dynamic. Guy in the band meets girl in the audience. Guy leaves a few days later. That is not the best way to learn about normal adult relationships. Let's just say that. And it's all I'd known. And again, I was 28. Peter is 19 now. And anyway, just so far ahead. So just super happy for him, proud of him, which of course is about the best feeling you can have as a parent. So that's a nice, lovely up. Another one is sort of up and down, which is that I finally sold my old Fender amp. Back when I was playing, and putting out my own records and stuff, so probably 95 through 2010, I had this great old Fender amp. It was a 1966 Tremolux with a 210 cabinet. And I loved that amp, still love it, sounds great, super loud, but great. And it's been in storage now for 15 years, so I finally realized I was never going to use it again, and that no one in my family was going to want it when I'm gone, so it was time to sell it. I've actually sold a ton of gear the last few months, which is how I paid for my fancy new electric scooter. The amp was the first thing I listed because I thought it was worth the most and it would go right away, but it didn't. Everything else sold but the amp, and I was starting to think maybe it wouldn't, confused by that. But I finally got an offer from a vintage guitar shop up in Minneapolis. And honestly, there's a good chance I bought the amp from them 20 years ago. And that's why I had to make that round trip to Minneapolis I talked about last week. In my Tesla report, I was taking the amp to the shop. But anyway, it sold. And it's still a little melancholy, but overall, very happy about that. For my downs, of course, my cold is a big one. Just classic, low energy, bad sleep, eating a ton, feeling heavy. Also not exercising. I missed both the gym and pickleball this week. That's a special bummer for me. I'm in that kind of place, I'm sure you've been there, where it kind of seems impossible I'll ever get back where I was with energy. But of course, I know I will soon enough. The other down is the Trump inauguration. And that's been harder than I expected. Honestly, sort of broke me with all those awful executive orders. Sort of weird, too, because we've known it was coming, right? I've been talking about it all these months, but it was still kind of a shock and a gut punch. Pardoning all those January 6th rioters was the big one. We'll talk more about that in top stories. But there were also a lot of other smaller items that are just depressing. I know I talk about this all the time, but we really are going to need to put all our mental game skills to work, or this massive gravity we're coming into is going to pull us down. I mean, I know we can do it. I know I can do it personally. I'm not, truly worried at that level, but it's not going to happen by itself, right? It's going to be work to be done. But the alternative is just unacceptable. I mean, there still is a chance for us to minimize the damage, but we're going to have to stay awake and alert and be engaged to do it. And by the way, the shock and awe approach they're taking is specifically designed to keep us from doing that, right? To bum us out so much that we tune out and give up. We're not going to do that. Anyway, it's a bummer. It's going to be a bummer for a while, but that's where we are. And those are my ups and downs for the week. Next up, top stories. The big story this week is Trump pardoning the January 6th rioters. He let out of jail the people most responsible for the insurrection, the most violent, the most dangerous. They are allowed to buy guns again. Now, as an example, as felons, they wouldn't have been able to do that. They are out and free to pick up right where they left off. Even worse, now they know that as long as the violence is in support of Trump, they'll get away with it. The only protection against this is law enforcement and the Justice Department. Do you think Trump's Justice Department is going to charge these guys? And with the Supreme Court immunity decision, Trump himself can do basically anything he wants, illegal things, and also never be held accountable in court. It really is heartbreaking. I honestly thought maybe he wouldn't go that far. I thought maybe with the messages coming out from J.D. Vance saying people who had assaulted police officers shouldn't be pardoned, that he would leave the worst offenders in jail. But this was the worst possible outcome. Hard to imagine Trump exceeding my expectations for how low he can go, but he definitely did here. It could not have been worse. And by the way, the normalizing and permitting of political violence is one of the first big steps toward authoritarianism. It's right out of the playbook, which again is exactly what we've been warning about, right? So here we are. It's happening, starting on day one. Which brings me also to all the companies and billionaires and politicians who are playing along, especially the companies. On one level, you can understand it. Their job officially is to benefit their shareholders. This is the new reality. You have to play along. Again, from one perspective, it's irresponsible not to. On the other hand, however, there were a lot of companies. I saw a great series last year called The New Look, Apple TV, I believe, about Nazi-occupied France and how Coco Chanel collaborated with the Nazis. There were a lot of people and companies back then who made the same reasonable calculation that supporting the regime was a smart and safe thing to do, but they ended up being collaborators, having that stigma. They were held accountable for that, and it was pretty ugly in a lot of cases, and justifiably so. In my mind, everyone who is supporting Trump now, especially for commercial gain, is playing a dangerous and irresponsible game. When this goes bad, it's going to be on them, along with everyone else. And we will remember, at some point, basic morality and decency and humanity have to come before personal gains and shareholder returns especially. They just do. I mean, it's really so obvious, right? And I really hope these people are thinking seriously about that. Speaking of which, the other big item for me this week was Elon Musk's Nazi salute at the inauguration. I know people have different takes on this, but looking at that video, I can't see it any other way. And when you take that, add that to his recent comments supporting the far right in Germany, I just don't think there's any way around it. For some reason, there is something seriously wrong with this guy in a crazy and, it looks like, fascist and dangerous way. So we have to start calling people out, right? Call your senators, your representatives. Do you support this? Do you support close White House advisors flashing Nazi salutes? Do you support pardoning violent criminals who assaulted police officers and were convicted by a unanimous jury of sedition against our country? Do you support billionaires guiding policy that benefits them directly, that clear corruption? I know they're in power now. There's not a ton we can do, but we have to at least lay down a marker that we're paying attention and we're going to remember. A couple more little news items, just to show how small and petty Trump is. On day one, he ordered the portrait of Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, removed from the Pentagon. Never been done before, no reason given, but we know the reason. Milley has been a vocal critic of Trump. So down comes the portrait. Top priority, day one. How small a person do you have to be to dishonor a lifelong public servant like that? The top military officer in the country, just because he wasn't nice to you. What message does that send about your belief in and support for the rest of the military and the things they hold sacred? It's crazy. Trump also canceled Secret Service protection for his former national security advisor, John Bolton. Bolton has been the target of an assassination plot by the Iranians. He's in real danger, but he's also said bad things about Trump, so sorry, you're on your own. Again, day one priority. In the petty and dumb department, Trump canceled the investment in new EV charging stations. This was a big investment that Biden had put into place. He canceled it. And this really is just dumb and self-serving. He has some sort of, jingoistic support of oil. It makes no sense. We need to win the race to electrify cars and trucks. It's going to happen. The question is just who wins, right? It helps our country in every way. Charging stations are the choke point to more adoption of EVs. For him to stop progress on this, it's just dumb. It really is. In the petty and corrupt department, I'm sure you saw this, but he launched a new digital coin like 2 or 3 days before the inauguration. This is just a total scam, transparent scam. Things like this are called shit coins for a reason. This is the President of the United States launching a new scam business right before he steps into the Oval Office. Just cannot get your head around it. Clear corruption, right out in the open. He could not care less. And all of this is only the first week. God help us and bring us strong mental game skills. One piece of good news on the resistance front, more great stuff from our neighbors. This is a quote from a Canadian member of Parliament. Quote, "Donald Trump, you're a disgrace as a human being. While you may have gotten the presidency, you're still a disgrace. You're a convicted felon, a pervert. You treat your allies with disdain while you kiss up to Putin. Anytime, anywhere, Donald, we will take you on," end quote. You have to love that. If only our own politicians were as strong and bold and clear as that. Speaking of bold, a Danish member of Parliament on their House floor regarding the Greenland talk, quote, "Mr. Trump, fuck off," end quote. Sorry about kids. And of course, there was a beautiful moment where the bishop during the Inauguration Day service didn't even call him out. It wasn't even really a pushback. She just said, "Please, Mr. President, think about these people who are vulnerable and frightened." And of course, he and all of MAGA were just so offended by that, so outrageous to ask him to be empathetic and caring. But the clarity and the power in her simple comments were just so refreshing against all the craven bullshit from Trump and his Republican cronies. For our crazy of the week, speaking of craven, I think I want to call it craven of the week now and then. We can start with the Pete Hegseth hearings in the Senate. Every one of those senators know how unqualified he is. There's no question about it. And this is the Armed Services Committee. They know how it works. They know how important the role of the Secretary of Defense is to our national security. They know he's a terrible and dangerous nominee, but they are twisting themselves into ridiculous, embarrassing knots to find ways to support him anyway. And why? Because they're afraid of Trump. It's no more complicated than that. The Senate is not supposed to be a subservient body. They are an equal body to the president. They're supposed to be a check and a balance. Make sure nominees are qualified. They're supposed to be serious, responsible people defending the Constitution. But they are being craven lapdogs instead. Here's another good one. I guess this is crazy. Trump has ordered health agencies to stop making health-related statements until at least February 1st. They can only make statements if they've been approved by, get this, a political appointee. We have a bird flu virus problem, which, by the way, Mr. Bring Down Costs is already sending the price of eggs through the roof. Could get much, much worse. But our national health experts are forbidden to say anything, to give warnings about public health threats. How do you make sense of that? One last point. During the campaign, everyone was making a big noise about Project 2025, me included, about the threat it represented. And Trump, of course, made an especially big noise saying, oh, no, that's not me. Nothing to do with me, remember? He even threatened to sue people who said it was about him. Well, guess what? The architect of Project 25, or at least one of the architects, Russell Vought, maybe Vogt is the pronunciation, has been appointed to the exact position needed to implement the plan, Office of Management and Budget. He is the new director. And they have already done many of the things on the Project 2025 agenda. It was always Trump's plan. The denials were all a lie. We knew it, right? And that's week one. Yay. All right, that's top stories. Next up, Inner Game Gold. Last week, we talked about the idea that you can't want part of someone's life without wanting all of it. That's especially helpful in today's world. This week, I want to go back to basics and revisit the core observation of the inner game, which is that you have thoughts, but you are not your thoughts. Just observing the basic reality of our dual nature. Dual nature meaning there are, in a sense, two people in there. There's you who hears the thoughts, and there's someone else who is speaking the thoughts. Now, this is a somewhat controversial topic. There are some people, specifically my hero, Sam Harris, and others in the mindfulness community, who will say that this observation of our dual nature is actually an illusion. The real reality is that there's no self there at all. But I have a couple of problems with that. First, it sounds crazy, so it puts people off. What do you mean there's no self? I mean, who are you having this conversation with? Second, assuming it's even true, it takes an advanced level of practice to see it. I've certainly not had that experience myself. So again, the vast majority of people will never experience what they're talking about. So holding that up as the ultimate truth only sends the message to people that they're not doing it right. If they don't have that experience, they're not really getting it, which makes them feel bad about their practice and want to stop. But my biggest problem with it is that this observation of our dual nature is really the best, most powerful thing anyone can do for themselves, right? It is the key to a whole new world of self-confidence and focus and creativity and happiness. So anything you would do that would put up a barrier to having that experience just seems wrong-headed and counterproductive to your own goals for helping people. So anyway, that's a bit of a rant, but it goes to how important this basic observation is. You have thoughts, but you are not your thoughts. There are two people in there, and the other person is not your friend. As a reminder, if you've read the book or taken the training, this is the same observation at the heart of the classic sports book, The Inner Game of Tennis. It's what put Eckhart Tolle on his path in the power of now, and it's what turned things around for me some 30 years ago. And I wanted to return to it this week because, as I've been saying for the past few months, we are coming into what might be the highest gravity period of our lives. Maybe it won't be that bad, but it feels like it might. And if we don't have the inner skills to counter it, it will pull us down. And we just don't want that to happen for a bunch of reasons, not the least of which being we want to continue to be able to be happy. We want to retain the ability to see and experience joy in our lives. And the farther down we get pulled by this gravity, the harder that is. So let's go back to the inner game fundamentals to get in fighting shape for what's coming. You have thoughts, but you're not your thoughts. And by extension, you have emotions, but you're not your emotions. You have a body, but you're not your body. That's gold. And it's interesting. It's easy to see the last one, right? The difference between you and your body. If you had an accident, for example, lost a finger or your leg or something, it doesn't at all seem like that would change who you are as a person, right? It gets harder with emotions. If you didn't react the way you do now to things, both positive and negative, would you be the same person? That's interesting to think about. It feels like the answer might be no, though it would be yes. And seeing it with your thoughts is the hardest of all. We are so identified with our thoughts. We don't see them as thoughts. We just think they're who we are. But when you take a close look, it's super clear that that's not true. Again, just observe what's going on, right? There's one person who's hearing the thoughts that come up, and that's you. And there's another person who is speaking the thoughts you're hearing. We're going to do more about this on the challenge of the week. One small clarification, though. There's a big difference between thinking and hearing thoughts. The picture I just described is hearing thoughts. They arise, and we notice them. In that case, it does feel like someone else is speaking. Thinking, on the other hand, is like we're speaking. If I'm doing some writing, for example, and I'm stuck on how to say something, I will pause, ideas will come up. That's me hearing thoughts coming from someone else, somewhere else. When I start working on those ideas, though, engaging with them, that might work. Let's see what we can do with that. That's me speaking now. You can just hear that as I describe it, if that makes sense. And even with that, again, it's describing a dynamic with two separate people, right? Our essential dual nature. Anyway, that's a lot of rambling. But that's our inner game gold for this week. You have thoughts, but you are not your thoughts. This is the foundation. The more real this observation is for you, the more control you'll have over your inner game. All right, next up, raise your outer game. This week, I want to talk about relationships, and specifically the masculine-feminine question. What is the right balance, the right kind of partnership in a relationship? And by the way, this is not about sex or gender. Every couple and really every person has their own mix of masculine and feminine energy. So it's helpful to think about the role that plays in a healthy relationship. And it's on my mind because of all the talk lately on the right about masculinity, how it's undervalued and stifled and stigmatized. And of course, they definitely mean gender when they talk about it. But for me, the kind of masculinity they mean is just backward and primitive. It's about aggression and conflict and intimidation. It's entitled, ferociously demeaning to women. It really just feels like an attempt to take things back to when they had all the advantages just because they were men and really because they were white men. I much prefer the view of masculinity that Scott Galloway and others talk about, which is that the real masculine role is to protect and serve the people we care about, which of course is also the feminine role, just with a slightly different emphasis, typically. And also it just occurred to me the hypocrisy of people calling for a return to traditional masculinity being the same people calling for more meritocracy. You heard that word, I swear, 50 times in the Pete Hegseth hearing. We just want to make everything a meritocracy. And that's a great idea. I love meritocracy as long as everyone starts with an equal opportunity, which is where it tends to fall apart. But anyway, first, it's hilarious for him to call for that when he is literally the least qualified person to ever be nominated for that position. I mean, the lack of self-awareness in that is just stunning. But it's also hilarious for him and people like him to call for meritocracy when they also say women should not be in certain positions just because they're women. He's famously opposed to women serving in combat, though they've been doing it successfully for years. He's reported to have said women shouldn't be allowed to vote. He is, of course, accused of multiple instances of sexual assault. It's a bit rich for these backward, entitled white guys to be talking about meritocracy. But anyway, back to the relationship question. What is the role of masculinity? What's the right balance? What I think works is for the relationship to be an actual partnership where you collaborate on pretty much everything, and the energy balance comes in on basically who takes the lead with whatever it is you're working on. With Margaret and I, for example, big picture stuff, sort of vision, priorities, direction. I think she's better at that. I'm happy to let her lead, and then I get to work on checking things off the list, moving us in that direction. That works great. There are some times, like I can think of examples with the kids, where she has a strong sense for what needs to be said, and I agree with that, but she thinks I can do a better job doing it, so I'll take that. Other times she has a certain feeling about what to do, and I have a different perspective, and we go that way instead. Back in the day, I used to handle all the bills, sort of a typical male role. I had a more flexible schedule. I'm quicker with computer stuff. It just seemed like it made sense for me to do that. But she didn't like not knowing what was going on with our accounts, so she's been doing that now for a while, and it's fine. It's been years, really. It really is a partnership, and by the way, a meritocracy generally defined by who has the stronger feelings about the subject and who is best suited to taking it on. If you're really connected with each other and you respect each other and you have a sense of who is better at what and you're open to talking about it, it's a great way to go. You share the load. You make much better decisions. There's no doubt we are much smarter as a team. And so ultimately the whole masculine feminine question just doesn't come up. I mean, it's just irrelevant. And you could say, I guess some of the things I'm better at are, typical masculine energy things. Some of the things Margaret is better at are feminine energy things. But ultimately, the labels just don't matter, and it would seem silly and distracting to inject them into the conversation. And it would make no sense for us to use a traditional male-led model. That just makes me laugh. It's so ridiculous. Anyway, that's what has worked for us for these 34 years now, and I think it's a pretty good model in general. And I think it's important to talk about right now because the energy around this coming from Trump and the GOP is just so gross and in the opposite direction, actually looking to bring back a more masculine-centric approach. No thank you, bad idea, not going there. Balance and partnership is better. All right, that's Raise Your Outer Game this week. Next up, our challenge of the week. This week, let's work on this observation. You have thoughts, but you're not your thoughts. If you've done this already, it'll be a fun refresher. If you haven't, it could be the beginning of something really great for you. So step one, just sit quietly for a moment and observe your thoughts coming and going. Don't engage with them. Don't judge them. Just sit and notice what's in your mind. What are you thinking about right now? What's the next thought that comes up? What's the one after that? I picture this like sitting on a park bench, watching people go by, just noticing one by one as they appear and pass on by. So that's the first part. Just do that for a minute. And then really see what just happened. Notice that there are two players in that exercise. There's you noticing the thoughts coming and going, and there's the thoughts themselves that seem to come from somewhere else on their own, and even to be spoken by someone else. Also note that when you switch from one thought to another, or even to a space between, when you're not thinking at all, that you haven't changed or disappeared, right? You're still there. You're still the same you. Just like we said earlier, we could lose a finger, still be the same person. We also stay the same person no matter what we're thinking or if we're thinking at all. And if that is true, we are clearly separate from our thoughts by definition. If we can watch them come and go, we are separate from them. There's two things going on, us and them. We have thoughts, but we are not our thoughts. That's the exercise. And again, the more real it becomes for you, the more power you'll have over your inner game. And that is a beautiful thing. One of the most beautiful things. All right, that's the challenge of the week. I hope you enjoy this refresher, or even more exciting, seeing it for the first time, if that's what happens for you. Next up, highly recommended. Still reading The Black Widow by Daniel Silver. Still great, very enjoyable. I like it quite a bit. I always do. It's amazing to me you can have a series. There's a lot of books in this series. And of course, there's a lot of commonality to them, which is why I know I'm going to enjoy them. But they also can somehow stay fresh enough to be interesting and surprising. Anyway, really good. We have also, along with millions of other people, started watching season 2 of Severance. We watched the first episode with our family here in town this last week. Decided we're going to have a weekly watch party with them, pizza and Severance. That's going to be super fun. The first season left so many questions that we're just dying to get answers to, and it seems like that might not happen for a while, if ever. The mystery is clearly going to continue, but we're loving it, and that's just super fun for everyone. There's a new media outlet I'm interested in called The Contrarian. I think it was started by Norm Eisen and Jen Rubin. Jen was with the Washington Post. There have been so many top people, like kind of getting to be everyone now, leaving the Washington Post. That's a whole crazy story on its own. But this is a group of top journalists from all sort of different perspectives and angles from all over coming together to start their own new independent media company. I'm actually pretty excited about it. It's such a crazy time for journalism, and I'm more and more reminded how important it is, how critical it is to have good, trusted journalism. So I'm hopeful that this new model, online, subscription, truly independent, give us what we need going forward. I encourage you to check that out and subscribe. Of course, there's a link in the notes. Last thing is, I wanted to say a bit about my beautiful new scooter. I've mentioned it a few times already, sort of tangentially, but I haven't really talked about it directly. It's from a company called Aventura X out of California. You can find them online. The scooter looks just like the old classic Vespa scooters. It's just great looking. Also, though, all electric. We've had a couple of smaller electric scooters for a couple of years now from the Razor scooter company, and those have been great, but they're very basic. No shocks, no turn signals, no horn. Pretty pokey. Any kind of hill you're coming to, you wonder if you're going to make it up. Surprisingly loud, too. They use a chain drive system, and the noise is a problem for me. I wear earplugs when I ride just because of the engine noise, which is especially disappointing with electric, right? Again, they've been great. We've loved having them. Our daughter rides it all over town. All over town. Highly recommend those too if you can find them. I think they might be discontinued now. But my new one, the Aventura X, is just next level in every way. Everything I just mentioned the other ones don't have, this one does. Shocks, sort of thing smooth, turn signals, horn, so it's a lot safer. A key to start it and lock it. It's a lot more secure, super smooth and quiet. It's 3 times more powerful. Top speed of 30 versus 20. Just great. The only bummer is that it's still so cold out. I've only been able to ride it a couple of times for a few minutes, but I can already tell it's going to be a great improvement for running errands around town. And I actually expect I'll use it a lot more than the other one because it's so much better. It's also, I think, surprisingly affordable. They've reduced prices recently. They ship directly. Ours came right here to Baroque from California. It was a bit tricky to assemble. A little touch and go there. Also been a little tricky to get it registered, but that's a Wisconsin thing. Can't blame them for that. Anyway, bottom line, I love it. Aventura X, if you were in a position where you might make use of an electric scooter for neighborhood, nearby errands, highly recommended. As always, check the link in the notes if you're interested. All right, that's our show for this week. Reminder that we're offering Raise Your Inner Game Executive Coaching now, davidlevin.com for more on that. And, of course, everything else at raiseyourinnergame.com, the Sports Academy training, the Raise Your Inner Game book, our Advanced Mental Game Mastery course. We are coming into a super high gravity period. It's already starting. We're going to need all the inner game skills we can get to stay ahead of it. All right, hope you have a great week. Let me know any questions. Otherwise, keep up the good work. I'll see you next week.